cold in particular can be leveraged to improve mental health, physical health, and performance, meaning for endurance exercise, for recovering from various forms of exercise, for actually improving strength and power, and for enhancing mental capacity.
Meet Dr. Andrew Huberman, a distinguished neuroscientist and professor at Stanford University, who has dedicated his research to understanding how cold exposure affects our brains, metabolism, and overall health.
But deliberate cold exposure has also been studied in animal models and in humans in the context of increasing metabolism.
Many people are hesitant to try cold exposure because it's often viewed as uncomfortable, potentially harmful, or simply unbearable. The idea of intentionally exposing oneself to freezing temperatures can be daunting, conjuring images of shivering and discomfort. There's also a widespread belief that cold exposure may negatively impact health, potentially leading to colds or other illnesses. These misconceptions create a barrier, preventing many from exploring its potential benefits. However, in the research Dr. Andrew Huberman reviewed, it suggested that cold exposure, when done correctly, can enhance cardiovascular health, boost metabolism, improve mood-regulating neurotransmitters, along with many other benefits. Imagine gaining increased energy levels, an enhanced mood, and a stronger immune system from a practice that initially seems intimidating. The key is understanding the science behind cold exposure and safely incorporating it into your routine. Stick around and follow along as we uncover how exactly you can benefit from the protocols Dr. Huberman suggests. During cold exposure, hormones like norepinephrine and epinephrine are released. These neurotransmitters are vital for the body's stress response and mood regulation. Norepinephrine increases alertness, focus, and energy, while epinephrine enhances stress coping and boosts metabolic activity. Together, they contribute to mental clarity, improved mood, and increased resilience from cold exposure.
What happens when we get into cold is that we experience an increase in norepinephrine, in noradrenaline release, and in adrenaline release. The fact that cold exposure, deliberate or no, increases norepinephrine and epinephrine in our brain and body means that it is a very reliable stimulus for increasing norepinephrine and epinephrine. That's sort of an obvious statement, but that obvious statement can be leveraged to systematically build up what we call resilience. Now, when we experience a stressor in life, whether or not it's something bad happens in our relationship or something bad happens in the world, and we feel stress, that stress is the consequence of increases in norepinephrine and epinephrine in our brain and body. Very similar, if not identical, to the kinds of increases that come from deliberate cold exposure. So deliberate cold exposure is an opportunity to deliberately stress our body, and yet because it's deliberate and because we can take certain steps, which I'll describe in a moment, we can learn to maintain mental clarity, we can learn to maintain calm while our body is in a state of stress.
Now that we've explored the benefits of these hormones, let's delve into the different methods of cold exposure, specifically comparing cold showers to cold water immersion.
The most common question I get about deliberate cold exposure is whether or not cold showers are as good, better, or worse than cold water immersion up to the neck. I'm going to make all of that very simple for you by saying cold water immersion up to the neck with your feet and hands submerged also is going to be the most effective. Second best would be cold shower. Third best would be to go outside with a minimum amount of clothing, but of course clothing that is culturally appropriate and that would allow you to experience cold to the point where you would almost want to shiver or start shivering.
After understanding the methods of cold exposure, the next important question is, how cold should the temperature be for maximum benefits? Dr. Huberman suggests that the right temperature can vary, but it generally needs to be cold enough to elicit a physiological response without causing harm.
How cold depends on your cold tolerance, your core metabolism, and a number of other features there is simply no way I could know or have access to. So I would like you to use this rule of thumb. If you are using deliberate cold exposure, the environment that you place yourself into should place your mind into a state of, whoa, I would really like to get out of this environment, but I can stay in safely.
Dr. Huberman suggests experimenting with the temperature, as it can vary daily and throughout the 24-hour cycle due to your body's natural rhythm. Your body temperature is lower in the morning, rises in the afternoon, and drops at night. Try taking a cold shower at 11 p.m. and another in the afternoon. You'll find it requires more resilience and willpower at night.
But deliberate cold exposure has also been studied in animal models and in humans in the context of increasing metabolism, even in converting certain fat cells that we call white fat cells, which are the ones where energy is stored, they're the ones that we typically think of as kind of blubbery fat, to beige or brown fat, which is thermogenic fat, meaning that it can increase core body temperature and serves as kind of a furnace by which we increase our core metabolism.
Brown fat, also known as brown adipose tissue, is a special type of fat in the body that burns calories to generate heat and help maintain body temperature in cold conditions. Unlike regular white fat, which stores energy, brown fat is more active and can aid in weight management and overall metabolic health. Think of it as your body's natural heater, working hard to generate warmth and keep you healthy. Ever wondered how this amazing fat works its magic? Let's start by discussing a recent study titled Altered Brown Fat Thermoregulation and Enhanced Cold-Induced Thermogenesis in Young, Healthy Winter Swimming Men. Although the study focused on men, the effects are likely applicable to women as well.
They looked at deliberate cold exposure in this group of young men, and they used that 11-minute threshold per week. So in other words, they had them get into cold water for approximately 11 minutes per week. What they discovered was that by going into these cold environments, in this case, cold water immersion up to the neck, these men experienced increases in so-called brown fat thermogenesis and increases in core body temperature that translate to increases in core body metabolism. Now, the overall increases in core body metabolism that they experienced were not extremely large. They were statistically significant.
Moving on, let's explore how cold exposure can help reduce inflammation in the body, which can directly improve cardiovascular health.
Deliberate cold exposure can be very useful for recovery, likely through reductions in inflammation in muscle and connective tissue. And while this study did not look specifically at the mechanisms of reduced inflammation caused by deliberate cold exposure, those mechanisms are somewhat known. There are a number of studies that have pointed to the fact that deliberate cold and cold generally can reduce inflammatory cytokines such as IL-6, interleukin-6. It can increase anti-inflammatory cytokines such as interleukin-10 and so on. Without getting into all those details, I think it's sufficient to say that if you are somebody who experiences a lot of delayed onset muscle soreness, taking a cold shower after your training or getting into a cold immersion after your training, even if it's a few hours later, ought to help. And if you are doing particularly intense training, then you probably want to ratchet up the number of cold exposure sessions that you're doing, even if those have to be done on separate days from your training, because a lot of the inflammatory effects of training, endurance and strength training, are actually occurring some hours away from the training stimulus. So it's not just that inflammation goes up radically during training, which it often can, but that it can occur even in the days and even weeks afterwards, depending on how intense and how long duration that training is. So deliberate cold exposure is very powerful as an anti-inflammatory tool.
To sum up, cold exposure can activate brown fat, enhance cardiovascular health, and improve your mood and focus. It's a powerful practice that can boost your overall well-being when done safely and gradually. Ready to take the plunge? Experience the benefits firsthand. Dive into a cold shower or an invigorating ice bath and share your experience with us in the comments below. Remember to subscribe for more transformative health and wellness insights. Don't miss out on our next video as we continue to share the path to personal health and longevity. Life's better with a healthy buzz.